Tes tes. Oke. Bismillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Uh, Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. First of all, let's pray and thank unto our God, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has been giving us mercies and blessing. Secondly, may salawat and salam always be with our best prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who has guided us from the darkness to the brightness, namely Islam religion. Good evening, brothers and sisters. How are you tonight? Okay, tonight I'm going to make a video for my 1 hour video project. So I'm going to talk about business and I'm going to talk about some of a business and about business and job in the digital era. Okay, so I'm for the business. I'm going to what's it called? Uh, I'm going to talk about e-commerce. Okay, e-commerce or electronic commerce is the buying and selling of goods and services over an electronic network, primarily the internet. These business transactions occur either as business to business, business to consumer, consumer to consumer, or consumer to business. How does this e-commerce work? E-commerce is powered by the internet, where customers can access an online store to browse through and place orders for products or services via their own devices. It's like shopping but online. You open a website or an app like Tokopedia, Shopee, Blibli, and many more. You search for the stuff you need, order it, check out, and boom, shopping finished. The program will process your order and inform the seller about the stuff that you ordered. After that, the seller will ship the order to you. For payment method, you can use online or offline. Online payment is like transferring your money from your bank account, and offline payment is paying for the stuff you ordered when it arrives. It is called COD, cash on delivery. Some of the advantages of e-commerce is availability. Aside from outages or scheduled maintenance, e-commerce sites are available 24 hours a week. Sorry, uh, sorry, are available like most of the time, allowing visitors to browse and shop at any time. Uh, the next is speed of access. While shoppers in a physical store can be slowed by crowds, e-commerce sites run quickly, which is determined by compute and bandwidth considerations on both consumer device and e-commerce site. Product pages and shopping cart pages load in a few seconds or less. And an e-commerce transaction can compress a few clicks and take less than 5 minutes. There are also wide availability. E-commerce enables brands to make a wide array of products available, which are then shipped from a warehouse after a purchase is made. Customers will likely have more success finding what they want. Next, we have easy accessibility. Customers shopping a physical store may have a hard time determining which aisle a particular product is in. In e-commerce, visitors can browse product category pages and use the site search feature to find the product they want. Uh, Next is international reach. Brick and mortar businesses sell to customers who physically visit their stores. With e-commerce, sorry, businesses can sell to any customer who can access the web or the app. E-commerce has the potential to extend a business's customer base. Hmm, there are also lower costs. Pure play e-commerce businesses avoid the cost associated with physical stores, such as rent, inventory, and cashiers. Although they may incur shipping and warehouse costs, although they may incur shipping and warehouse costs. The last is personalization and product recommendations. E-commerce sites can track visitors' browse, search, and purchase history. They can use this data uh, to present useful and personalized product recommendations and obtain valuable insights about target markets. Examples include the sections of Amazon product pages labeled frequently bought together, and customers who view this item also view it. Okay, now into the disadvantages of e-commerce. The first is there are limited customer service. If a customer has a question or issue in a physical store, the customer can see a clerk, cashier, or store manager for help. In an e-commerce store, customer service may be limited. The site may only provide support during certain hours of the day, or a call to a customer service phone number may keep the customer on hold. Next is not being able to touch or see the product. While images on a web page can provide a good sense about the product, it's different from experiencing it directly, such as playing music on speakers, assessing the picture quality of a television, trying your new clothes, uh, what else? Or like trying the electronics that you want to buy. E-commerce can lead consumers to receive products that differ from their expectations, which leads to return. In some scenarios, the customer bears the burden for the cost of shipping the return item to the retailer. Next, we have wait time. If a customer sees an item that he or she likes in a store, the customer pays for it and then goes home with it. With e-commerce, there is a wait time for the product to be shipped to the customer's address. Although shipping windows are decreasing as next-day delivery is now quite common, it's not instant. It's not instantaneous, or it's not that instant. It's not that instant. The last is security. Skilled hackers can create authentic-looking websites that claim to sell well-known products. Instead, the site sends customers forfeit or imitation versions of those products, or simply collects customers' credit card information, legit, or collect the customer's credit card information. Uh, Legitimate e-commerce sites can also carry risk, especially when customers store their credit card information with the retailer to make future purchases easier. If the retailer site is hacked, hackers may come into the possession of customers' credit card information. Okay, next I'm going to talk about uh, some about uh, hold on, developer, uh, programmer, and network engineer. Okay, the first is what's the difference between a developer and a programmer? If you're hiring technical staff for your company, you may be asking, what is the difference between a developer, a programmer, and an engineer? Does it matter which term to use in your job posting? Okay, developers have a larger scope of responsibility. In a nutshell, the basic difference between a developer and a programmer is the scope of their work. Yeah. Developers are more involved with and have a greater understanding of the full project scope. Programmers are involved in a specific part of the project, coding. Programmers are also known as engineers and coders. A programmer's job includes writing code, testing, and fixing bugs. A programmer converts a design into constructions that a computer can follow. These instructions are coded using one of many programming languages. They usually know several of these languages, including Java, C Sharp, PHP, Oracle, SQL Server, JavaScript, etc. Specialized programmers focus on one type of programming. General programmers write code for many types of software. Typically, programmers work in groups or teams under a senior programmer, or you can call it the team leader that supervises their work. There are the there are five types of computer programmers. There are application programmers. They write programs for a specific task. For example, programs to track inventory at a factory. The second is system programmers. They write programs to maintain computer system software. For example, operating systems, or database management systems. The third is AI or machine learning engineers. The fourth is game programmers. And the fifth is mobile developer. Developers, also referred to as software engineers. Their job responsibilities include writing code. They also contribute to many other aspects of the project or software development process. Along with coding, a developer's tasks often include software design, development, research, writing documentation and specs, maintenance, testing software, or implementations, and analysis. Basically, a developer is a programmer first and foremost, but with larger scope of responsibility for other aspects of the project. Mobile developers are highly in demand to write applications for mobile phones, tablets, and other devices. Mobile developers tend to specialize in Android, Java, Kotlin, or iOS platform, which use Objective-C, uh, like Objective-C and Swift. Programmers often transition into mobile app development because these roles demand a higher salary. DevOps engineer are senior developers or systems analysts who have skills in business, organization, configuration, automation, operations, and leadership. A programmer and a developer are both involved with coding, but their jobs are very different. An amazing programmer doesn't necessarily make an amazing developer, because a developer has to juggle more parts of the project. Many developers start out as programmers and work their way into developer positions if they are interested in taking on greater responsibility. The best developers are difficult to find and retain because they are highly in demand. Okay, now we go on to the next part. What is a network engineer? A network engineer is a technology professional who has the necessary skills to plan, implement, and oversee the computer networks that support in-house voice, data, video, and wireless network services. Although the job titles network engineer and network administrator are sometimes used as synonyms, a network engineer usually has more executive responsibility than executive responsibilities than a network administrator. The engineering side deals more with planning, design, and technical specifications. The administration side deals mostly with day-to-day maintenance, management, and troubleshooting efforts. The job titles may also be differentiated by education or earnings. Typically, a network engineer has more education and earns more than a network administrator. Employment projections show that network engineers are in demand, and the profession and closely related professions are expected to grow between 4% to 7% in the next decade. Okay, what does a network engineer do? Network engineers focus on delivering high availability network infrastructure to sustain the user's online and on-site information technology activities. Network engineers often overlap with other roles, such as computer network architects or security systems engineers, and work internally within an organization or as outside consultants. Network engineers design and implement network configurations, troubleshoot performance issues, carry out network monitoring, and configure security systems such as firewalls. They often report to a CIO. Yes, CIO, Chief Information Security Officer, and other line of business leaders to discuss and decide upon overall business goals, policies, and network status updates. In many situations, uh, network engineers work closely with project managers, and other engineers, manage capacity, and carry out remote or on-site support. Network engineer skills and qualifications. Sorry. The next we have network engineer skills and qualifications. Yeah, sorry. A job candidate may only need an associate degree to obtain an entry-level network engineering job, but most positions require a bachelor's degree in computer science or multiple years of additional experience. Many network engineers also come from fields such as electrical engineering, physics, or mathematics. Engineers must be able to understand complex networks and pinpoint problems or suggest ways to improve them. They must also be able to work collaboratively as well as instruct other engineers and support staff to operate the network. And they have to be able to be flexible enough to work with both engineers and line of business colleagues who may not have any understanding of networking. In addition to technical skills, network engineers need analytical, leadership, organizational, and communication skills. And attention to detail and the ability to problem solve are also important. Increasingly, network engineers also need to know about uh, applications and software developments, reflecting the growing role of automation and software-defined networking. Therefore, engineers need to understand traffic flows, application priority, and data transport. Additionally, the engineers should also become acquainted with hyperconverged virtualization, security, containers, wide area networking, and storage engineering. They should also understand the basic elements of networks, such as clients, servers, internet, routing, IP addresses, and network hubs. Uh, Next, after that, oh, network engineer certifications and training. A number of universities and other institutions offer network engineer training courses and programs. Several institutions offer certifications that can help boost professional credentials. For many engineers, additional qualification and training are closely tied to the Cisco Engineering Certification Program, which offers several levels of career training. Other certifications are available from vendors and organizations such as Juniper Networks, Microsoft, Aruba, Alcade, Lucent Enterprise, Riverbed Technology, SolarWinds, HPE, Extreme Networks, and the IPv6 Forum. Sorry. Some of the more popular network engineer certifications include uh, CompTIA Network Plus, Cisco Certified Technician Routing and Switching, Cisco Certified Network Associate, Cisco Certified Network Professional, Cisco Certified Internet Work Expert, and VMware Certified Professionals Network Virtualization. Okay, now about the salaries. Typical network engineer salary range from 49,000 dollars to more than $132,000 annually, depending on skills, experience level, and geographic area. According to Glassdoor, the average base salary for a network engineer in the US is $87,000 per year. According to Indeed, engineers can also earn bonuses, and some employers offer profit sharing programs as well. Network engineers typically work 40 hours a week, but they may be called upon for weekend work, evenings, and other times outside of business hours to resolve technical problems. Now about the specialized roles in network engineering. Network engineers can specialize in several roles and responsibilities, including the following. Cloud networking architects assist organizations with cloud infrastructure deployment. Sorry. sorry, local area. There, the second is local area network or LAN. Engineers install and maintain large LANs for enterprises. The third is network security specialists. They detect and prevent network security threats. The fourth is network engineers can also specialize in VoIP, telecom, and data center implementations. Sorry about that. Got something in my mouth. Okay, the last is about the network engineer career prospects. Network engineers may also pursue different paths within the networking field, like network analyst, for example. They specialize in the installation and maintenance of networks and often crossover between the technical and business sides of an organization. Network managers fill a similar role but must train and direct network technicians. Below is a list of jobs beside network engineer that are suitable for someone with network engineering skill, like network manager, network analyst, network administrator, network specialist, network technician, and network solution architects. Uh, okay, that's it for tonight. Yeah, it looks like the video is not long enough, so yeah, I'll see you in the next part. Wabillahi taufiq walhidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Test this. Okay. Hey there. Back with me for on the next for another part of the 1 hour video project. Okay, so this time I am going to talk uh, about my hometown. Okay, first we have cultures from Semarang. About Semarang. Semarang is the capital and largest city of Central Java province in Indonesia. It was a major port during the Dutch colonial era and is still an important regional center and port today. The city has been named as the cleanest tourist destination in Southeast Asia by the ASEAN Clean Tourist City Standards, or ACTCS for short, for 2020 until 2022. Sorry. Semarang is also the ninth most populous city after Jakarta, Surabaya, Bekasi, Bandung, Medan, Depok, Tangerang, and Palembang. The Semarang metropolitan area, or Kedong Sapur, has a population of over 6 million in 2020. The population of the city is predominantly Javanese with significant Chinese presence. Semarang is also called the City of Jamu because it is an important center for the production of jamu, which are a range of Indonesian herbal medicine that are popular across Indonesia. Oh, sorry, the text is blocked by the picture. Oh well, let's continue. Okay, now about the traditional house. Joglo. The traditional house is the same as Japanese traditional house because, well, most of the people there are Javanese. Joglo. Joglo is a type of traditional vernacular house of the Javanese people or Javanese Oma. The word joglo refers to the shape of the roof. In the highly hierarchical Javanese culture, the type of the roof of a house reflects the social and economic status of the owners of the house. Joglo houses is traditionally associated with Javanese aristocrats. Joglo roof can be implemented to a dwelling omah or a pavilion pendopo. There are 7 types of joglo building. First is joglo kepuhan, used for the paringgitan. Tarajumas, lambang gantung or pangrawit, used for the audience hall of royal palace. Joglo wantah, joglo ceblokan, tawan boni, and semartinandu. Joglo buildings are further divided into 2 styles, the male and female. The difference between them is that the female version is larger in dimension than the female. In a structured Japanese society and tradition, the Joglo house is traditionally associated with the residence of Japanese aristocrats. The Joglo type houses is reserved for Japanese palace. For Japanese palace, official residence, government estate, and houses of nobles, or ningrat. The Joglo roof is the most complex of all Japanese roof types. Different with the other type of Japanese roof, such as the limasan and kampung roof, Joglo roof does not use king posts. Joglo roof consists of columns that become higher as it goes to the center. The four innermost main house columns are often the tallest, while the outer columns are the lowest. These four innermost house columns support a roof that is the steepest of all type of Japanese roof, almost forming a pyramid, except that it comes to 2 points rather than a single one. These four innermost main house columns is surmounted by a unique structural element known as tumpang sari. Tumpang sari. A tumpang sari is basically layered beam structure. The outermost bands of beams support the rafters of both the upper and lower roofs, while the heavily ornate inner band of beams create a vaulted ceiling in the form of an inverted step pyramid. The basic joglo type houses can be increased in size by adding. Oh, okay. Sorry, I had to check if my face cam is blocking the text or images. Okay, let's go on. The basic joglo type houses can be increased in size by adding extra columns and extending the roof area outwards. Some very large joglo roof, such as the roof of the Grand Pendopo at the Mangkunagaran Palace, has a shape reminiscent of a mountain. Traditionally, joglo roof is used for the house proper omah or the pavilion pendopo of noble families. In a large house compound of Japanese noble family. Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze. Joglo roof covers the very center part of the house. The space in the middle of the house, known as the dalam, is considered the most sacred. This sacred space, especially the area beneath the tumbang sari, is often left empty. In modern time, the area has no specific usage, but traditionally an incense was burned once a week in this area to honor the rice goddess Dewi Sri, or in central Java to honor Nyai Roro Kidul. This sacred area is also the area where the bride and bridegroom are seated during their marriage ceremony. The joglo roof is an iconic Japanese roof form. Joglo roof has influenced the development of Dutch colonial architecture in Indonesia. Modern buildings in Indonesia, such as Big Hall or airport terminal buildings, sometimes use the joglo roof. Okay, now for the tourist destinations. Here we have Kota Lama, Semarang Old Town or Kota Lama, which is sometimes referred to by the locals as Little Netherlands. It was, it was established in the 18th century when Indonesia was a Dutch colony. There are more than 50 well-maintained colonial buildings in Kota Lama, displaying 18th, 16th, 19th, and 20th century European influenced architecture. Next is Pasar Semawis. Uh, it is also called Chinatown. Chinatown in Semarang has a night market known. Oh, sorry. Chinatown in Semarang has a night market known as Pasar Semawis, which is known for its cuisine and Chinese New Year celebration. After that, we have Tugu Muda. Tugu Muda or Youth Monument is a monument built to commemorate the services of the heroes who have fallen in the Battle of 5 Days in Semarang. The height of Tugu Muda is 53 meters. Tugu Muda is located in front of Lawang Sewu at Pemuda Street. It depicts the Tugu Muda fighting spirit and patriotism of Semarang residents, especially the youth who are persistent, self-sacrificing, and high spirits maintaining the independence of Indonesia. Uh, Okay, now it's Long Sewu. Long Sewu, or Javanese for 1,000 doors, was built as the headquarters of the Dutch East Indies Railway Company. The colonial era building is repeatedly a haunted house. Okay, here we have Belenduk Church. Belenduk Church, or in the other name Netherlands Indische Kerk, was built in 1753. The church is one of the oldest buildings in Kota Lama. Okay, here we have the Sampu Kong Temple. The Sampu Kong Temple is the oldest Chinese temple in the city. Taikaksie Temple was established in 1746. It is dedicated to Guanyin Bodhisattva and various Taoist deities. Okay, sorry. Uh, One of my friends just passed by and said salam. Okay, where were we? Central Java Grand Mosque. This mosque has a Muslim museum located located at Jalan Gajah Raya. The architecture of the mosque is inspired by the mosque in Makkah and Madinah. Okay, here we have Vihara Buddha Gaya Watugong. The 45-meter or 148 feet Buddhist temple has been named by Buri as the highest pagoda in Indonesia. It's located in Jalan Perintis Kemerdekaan Watugong, about 45 minutes drive from the center. Okay, last we have Pancasila Square. Located within the heart of Simpang Lima City Center, or SLCC, uh, is an infamous public arena at the town center. It has tourist pedicabs, cars, bicycles, chairs, pedestrian track, public toilet, roller skates, traditional games, grass field, and others. Nah, okay, now for the popular cuisine. Yeah, sorry. First we have Bandeng Presto. Bandeng Presto, or milkfish in English, is a typical Indonesian food from areas of Semarang, Central Java. Bandeng is a large toothless silverfish that lives in warm parts of the Pacific and Indian Ocean, and related to the herring and the salmon. It is commonly used in Indonesian cuisine. Because the fish is known to have many thorns, bandeng presto is popular food as bandeng thorns becomes very soft. Bandeng presto is prepared by deep frying or bake it in the oven and serve hot or warm. Next we have winko. Winko, Wiwinka or Bibika, which is sometimes called Winko Babat. Uh, there are many names for this one. Wiwinka or Bibika is a traditional Indonesian pancake-like snack made from coconuts. This dough is usually associated with Japanese cuisine. Winko is a type of cake made mainly of coconut and other ingredients. Winko is popular especially along the north coast of Java Island. It is sold mostly by peddlers on trains, bus, at bus stations, train stations, or in the producer's own shop. This might explain its popularity in Java. Sorry about that. This might explain its popularity in Java to as a gift to families upon returning from traveling, or oleh-oleh. Oleh-oleh means, sorry, I forgot. Okay, moving on. Winko is typically a round, almost hard coconut cake that is typically served in warm, small pieces. Winko is sold either in the form of a large plate-sized cake or small paper wrapped cakes. Wait, yeah, okay, that's right. Next we have lumpia. Lumpia are various types of spring rolls commonly found in Indonesia and the Philippines. Yeah, hold on, a little bit tired. Lumpia are made of thin paper-like or crepe-like pastry skin called lumpia wrapper. Enveloping savory or sweet fillings, it is often served as an appetizer or snack. It might be served deep fried or fresh, unfried. Lumpia are Indonesian and Filipino adaptations of the Fujianese and Teochew popia, which is created during the 17th century in the former Spanish colonial era. In Indonesia, lumpia has become a favorite snack and is known as a street hawker food in the country. In the Philippines, lumpia is one of the most common dishes served in gatherings and celebrations. In the Netherlands and Belgium, it's spelled Lampia, the Old Indonesian spelling, which has also become the generic name for spring roll in Dutch. A variant is the Vietnamese lumpia, wrapped in a thinner pastry, though still close in size to a spring roll, in which the wrapping closes the ends off completely, which is typical for lumpia. Tahu gimbal. Tahu gimbal is a dish that can commonly found in Semarang, Indonesia. It consists of fried tofu, tempe, and shrimp, paired with an assortment of crunchy vegetables served with a savory peanut sauce. This tasty meal is perfect for a late midweek lunch. When eating tofu gimbal, you should stir it first so that the spices are evenly mixed. Next, we have ganjil rel. Ah, okay, now I'm hungry. Roti gambang or ganjil rel is an Indonesian rectangular shaped brown bread with sesame seeds flavored with cinnamon and palm sugar. Roti gambang is named as a Betawi traditional bread from Jakarta. Yet it is also recognized as Javanese traditional bread as roti ganjil. This bread is typical Javanese bread and usually served during Dugderan, Ramadan, Idul Fitri, and oh, sorry about that, and other occasions. Roti gambang originates from Jakarta and Semarang, Central Java. This bread was listed on the 50 best breads in the world by CNN at 2019. The term gambang is a Betawi term refer to gambang, xylophone-like wooden or metal bars used as musical instruments as commonly found in Betawi Gambang Kromong Orchestra, as well as in gamelan orchestra. This naming was because the similarity of its shape with gambang bars. Its Japanese name, however, roti ganjil rel, means rail support bread, refer to wooden railroad tie. Again, to describe its similarity to rail tie that secured the rail upon the ballast. What does ballast mean? I don't know. Okay, let's move on. Ah, sorry, I forgot to meet the slide to introduce the festival. Okay, well, it's late anyway. Let's go on. Here we have Dugderan. Dugderan is an annual festival in Semarang to welcome the Ramadan month, a fasting month for Muslims. The word dug refers to the sound of beduk, and der refers to the sound of fireworks. The icon of the festival is a special puppet called Warak Ngendok. Warak means holy and Ngendok expresses a reward for Muslims. The puppet's feet are chained, representing people's desire that should be postponed during this holy month. As Tugderan is a festival unique for Semarang, it represents an important attraction for both local people and visitors. Okay, now about the awards. About the awards that Semarang has gotten. Semarang has got Adipura Award 6 times in a row since 2012. 2012. Okay. Sorry, I'm remembering the English for 12. Adipura Award is given for achievement in cleanliness and greenery at parks, streets, markets, shipbuilding, premises, schools, even cleanliness of waterways and rivers. Semarang City received the title of Best Smart Living and Best Smart Economy City Indonesia Smart Nation Award at 2018. Okay, now it's time for cultures from Kuningan, my other hometown. Well, I didn't know much about Kuningan, so I tried searching on Google, and I only found about the traditional house and tourist destinations. So sorry if there are many points that I miss. Okay, here we go. Cultures from Kuningan. About Kuningan. Kuningan is a town and district located in eastern West Java, Indonesia, between Cirebon and Tasikmalaya, about 200 kilometers east of Jakarta. It is the administrative center of Kuningan Regency. The district is located east of Mount Ciremai, about 3,078 meters, the highest mountain in West Java. The eastern part of the district is a valley. The district's landmark is a horse called Kuda Kuningan, and its motto is Kuningan Aman or safe, sehat or healthy, rindang or leafy, indah or beautiful, abbreviated as Kuningan Asri. Okay, now about the traditional house. Sundanese traditional house refers to the traditional vernacular house of Sundanese people. It is predominantly inhabited western parts of Java Island, West Java and Banten Province in Indonesia. The architecture of a Sundanese house is characterized by its functionality, simplicity, modesty, uniformity with a little details. Its use of natural touch materials and its quite faithful adherence to the harmony with the nature and environment. Sorry, let me rest for a bit. Feeling a bit tired. Okay, let's move on. The Sundanese traditionally maintain the knowledge of their ancestors and their traditional lifestyles in a close harmony with nature, which extends to their construction methods, using local materials of timber, stone, bamboo, thatch materials, and palm leaves. Sudanese traditional houses mostly take basic form of a gable roofed structure, commonly called kampung-style roof, made of thatch materials like ijuk black iron fibers, hitap leaves, or palm leaves, covering wooden frames and beams. Woven bamboo walls, and its structure is built on short stilts. Its roof variations might include hip and gabled roof. It's a combination of gable and hip roof. Okay, the more elaborate overhanging gabled roof is called tulang ngapak, which means bird spreading wings. Uh, Other traditional Sundanese house forms including buka pongpok, capit gunting, jublek nangkub, badak huai, tagok anjing, and perahu kemurep. The ornamentation commonly includes the O or X-shaped roof edges that called capit gunting, which is very similar to a certain X design of Malay houses roof. Next to houses, raised barn or called luwit in Sundanese is also an essential structure in traditional Sudanese agricultural community. Luwit is especially important during Serentown harvest ceremony. Okay. Compared to Javanese houses, Dayak longhouses, or Minangkabau houses, Sudanese traditional houses are much smaller with only consist of 3 parts or rooms for a single nuclear family. A more traditional house of Baduy people, a sub-ethnic of Sudanese people, is called Sulah Nyanda. It is commonly regarded as the blueprint of common Sudanese traditional houses. It is made from wooden frame, woven bamboo wall, and red palm leaves roof. The traditional house of Sulah Nyanda is divided into 3 parts. Sosoro or the front, Tepas or the middle, and Imah or the rear rooms. Each room functions according to the family requirements. The veranda-like front of the house is commonly called Tosoros. Is called commonly called the veranda-like front of the house, or commonly called Tosoro. Sorry about that. Serves as a guest reception area. This is because guests are usually not allowed to get into the house. Other functions, including a place to relax and weep for women, the front is shaped to the side with an opening gap as the entrance. The middle room is called tepas, used for sleeping quarter and family meetings, while at the back of the house, or commonly called as imah, used as a place to cook and store the produce of fields, especially rice. Each room is equipped with holes on the floor for air circulation. Yes, okay, now for the tourist destination. The first is Remis Lake. Remis Lake is located in the middle of the forest, and it has clear water as well as the cooling breeze from the mountain. This pretty lake is located in Kaduela village, Pasawahan, about 30 kilometers to the north from Kuningan downtown, or 20 kilometers to the southeast from Cirebon. To reach the lake, you can use the public bus with Jakarta Cirebon route, stop at Cilimus Market, and continue with Angkot or public minivan to it's a public minivan to Pasawahan. When you arrive, you can take a walk through the path around the lake or just sit at the saung. It's a traditional gazebo and restaurant near the lake and enjoy the view toward beautiful trees. If you actually want to have fun on the lake, there are water bikes that you can rent. The admission fee to enter the lake area is about 5,000 Indonesian rupiah per person. Okay, next is Cipari Prehistoric Park. Okay, sorry, I need to adjust my position. When you visit the park, you usually expect to see flowers. However, at Cipari Prehistoric Park, we'll see this distinctive view of prehistoric rock formations. They are neatly arranged in a lush green garden and grouped in circles, terraces, or tombs. There is also a museum where you can improve your knowledge about the life of prehistoric humans. Cipari Prehistoric Park is located no far from Kuningan downtown. Sorry, there's a typo there. Hmm? Sorry about that. To reach the park, you can drive a personal or rental car for. Oh, sorry about that. To reach the park, you can drive a personal or rental car for 5 kilometers to the west, about 15 minutes of drive. This park is open every day from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. There is no admission fee or ticket to enter the park. Okay, after that we have Mount Ciremai National Park. Mountainous areas always present amazing view, and this is what you will get if you visit Taman Nasional Gunung Ciremai or Mount Ciremai National Park or TNGC. It is located around 10 kilometers to the north of Kuningan downtown. TNGC is a great destination. Hold on. There is something going on. Okay, sorry about that. There are something going on, so many people are going back and forth, and it's a little loud. Okay, where were we? Oh, TNGC. TNGC is a great destination for nature lovers. Oh, sorry about. Okay, let's continue. Sorry about that. Another. Where are we? Oh, TNGC. TNGC is a great destination for nature lovers. You have to do long and quite difficult trekking to reach the peak and creature. There are trekking paths available for visitors. When you arrive on the peak, your efforts will be paid with amazing view from the highest mountains in West Java. The admission fee to enter Mount Ciremai National Park is about 50,000 Indonesian rupiah per person. This area can be entered anytime by hikers, except if the mountain area is closed for specific reasons. Okay, next we have Linggarjati Agreement Building. After the proclamation of independence in 1945, Indonesia still had to struggle for formal recognition from the international world. One of the historical buildings that witnessed Indonesia's struggles to achieve recognition of its independence was Linggarjati Agreement Building. This place is located in Linggarjati Village, Chilimus, not far from Mount Ciremai National Park. To reach this building, uh, you need to drive 15 kilometers to the north from Siliwangi Road and make a turn to the west from Bojong Linggarjati Road. In Linggarjati Agreement Building, you can see the original furniture used by Indonesian and Dutch delegates that were involved during the negotiation. Along the walls in the building, there are also photos that describe the situation during the historical. You only need to pay an pay you only need to pay an admission fee of 2,000 Indonesian rupiah per person when entering the building. Okay, it's a little bit too loud here. I'm going to pause the video for a bit. Okay, we're back now. Now it's about Tibulan beds and God's fish. Swimming in the mountainous area is a great solution to unwind and relax, especially after a visit various travel destinations. However, have you ever experienced the sensation of bathing with sacred fish? If you're curious, try visiting Tibulan Baths. Located at the feet of Mount Ciremai, Tibulan Baths have two large pools where there are sacred fish swimming, called Ikan Dewa or God's fish. The fish are believed to be the soldiers of Prabu Siliwangi, a famous local figure. Therefore, no one can catch or kill these fish. If you want to try the baths, you must pay an admission fee of 15,000 Indonesian rupiah per person. There are also 7 sacred springs near the baths. Many people believe that the water from these sacred springs has magical qualities when being used for washing or drinking. You can also visit the historical sanctuary of Prabu Siliwangi that is located near the spring. Okay. Is it nice? No. Here now we have Panembongan Hill. Nowadays, the most popular travel destinations have Instagram-friendly quality. Well, you know how people are these days. They like to take a picture and post them to social media. Yeah, like that. Beautiful, beautiful photos with amazing background view are definitely big hits on Instagram. If you visit Kuningan, you will find such Instagram-friendly destination in Panembongan Hill. This beautiful hill is located in Tembong Village, Garawangi. To visit the hill, you need to drive for about 7 kilometers to the southeast of Kuningan downtown, which is about 18 minutes long from Garawangi Road. Find a T-junction and make a turn to the south through Pagar Batu Road. The admission fee, sorry, I hurt my feet. The admission fee to the area cost about 5,000 Indonesian rupiah per person. If you want to climb and take pictures or selfie on top of the watchtower, you need to pay an additional fee of 2,000 Indonesian rupiah. Visiting hours are between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. Okay, okay. Last we have Kuningan Botanical Garden. Uh, Kebun Raya. Actually, there are more tourist destinations on Kuningan, but there are so many, so I just put some of them here in my presentation. Kebun Raya Kuningan or Kuningan Botanical Garden is located in forest area, about 38 kilometers from Kuningan downtown area. On the northern side of Mount Ciremai, this place was previously closed to development. Now you can come and enjoy beautiful view of the forest, flower gardens, and various public facilities. All of these are available with just to 10,000 Indonesian rupiah per person as admission fee. This travel destination is located right on the border of Kuningan and Cirebon regencies. This botanical garden is even closer from Cirebon than Kuningan. To visit Kuningan Botanical Garden, you can start from Paliaman. Take the path to the south and follow the road as far as 10 kilometers until you find the area. This place is open from 8 a.m. to 4 4:30 p.m. Ah, sorry. I forgot to delete this part. Next. Okay, we have come to the end of the presentation. Let's see. We still have a few minutes left. What else to talk about? I know. Uh, one of my favorite street, One of my favorite street food from Kuningan is cilok. Usually at around in the afternoon, around the afternoon, after asar maybe, or no, sorry, the time is not specific. When I'm visiting my family in the Kuningan, usually there is one there is one cilok seller that comes around. Usually he'll carry his bike and, well, what's it called, and honk his horn. Tunut tunut tunut, the sound is like that. Alright. What else? What from Semarang? From Semarang, my favorite uh, street food are Wingko and, well, the other one is not specific. It's popular. It's not specific to Semarang. Like, there are many across Indonesia. It is called bakpao. Wait, is it bakpao? No, I don't think so. Usually around 3 p.m. the seller goes around the neighborhood around my family's house at Semarang, and it's really good for $3,000. Sorry, for 3,000 rupiah, you can get one of the bakpao. My favorite is the green bean, green bean flavor. Okay, now I'm hungry. Okay, looks like uh, it's enough. Thank you for your attention. That's all from me. Sorry if I, never mind. Wabillahi taufiq walhidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye now. Hmm. Wait, where is the button? Okay, here. Wait, I just lost it. Sorry. Alright, so it turns out my video is still 2 minutes short until 1 hour. So yeah, I'm just gonna talk about some stuff to fill that 2 minutes. But I don't know what to talk. Hmm, what, is there anything I can talk about? Well, maybe about my hometown a bit. Well, in Kuningan, I really don't like to take a bath in the morning because the water is really cold at that time. Especially when you're sleepy, it will make you feel shocked. Like, mm, uh, what else? But in Semarang, the temperature is of the water is not really a problem because, well, it's cool. It's not too hot and not too cold. The vibe or wait, no, I'm not going to talk about that. What else? What else? In Kuningan, I really like the vibe in Kuningan. It has many of the people there are farmers. Wait, farmer? Yes, farmer. So there are many sawah. Sorry, I do not know the word in English. Mm, so the vibe is really fresh, like uh, what's it called? Very nature-ish, like yeah, like that. But Semarang, well, for the vibe maybe I prefer Kuningan. Oh, okay. It looks like the 2 minutes is done now. So yeah, thank you for listening to my nonsense speech for the 2 minutes. Wabillahi taufiq walhidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.